we editorialized on this. There's a range of opinions on the subject on the page, but where the page itself came down institutionally was that we hoped Britain would stay in, primarily because Britain's leaving will be bad for Europe, because Britain tends to act as a counterweight to some of the worst impulses of the continental countries. And so I read that editorial, and I found it very interesting. It kind of helped shape my own thinking. And when I was done reading it, I thought this is a very persuasive editorial. If I lived on the continent, I would hope, having read this, that Britain stays in. But of course, if I could vote on this, it would mean I was British, and I would vote to leave.
Right. Well, I mean, if nothing else, Britain leaving the European Parliament means we are deprived of the lovely spectacle of Nigel Farage flaying alive the leaders of the European Union. I mean, that's where really the UKIP party was born out of the European Parliament, ironically enough, isn't it?
Yeah, and there is speculation now that this means the end of UKIP, that it's sort of lost its purpose. It didn't do very well in the last general election in Britain, and so it may fade away. There's even speculation that when Farage went out early yesterday and said it looks like the referendum is going to lose, that he said that in hopes of maintaining his own party's relevance.
Ah, interesting. Speaking of people for whom this is relevant, it's been widely noted that this was a diverse electoral coalition. A lot of Tories for it, a lot of strength in Labour Party constituencies, meaning working class Brits who normally vote to the left. That sounds a little familiar to us in the United States right now. What does this mean for Trump, do you think?
I was wondering if you were ever going to get around to asking me about Donald Trump. I noticed, well, first of all, just a small detour since I got a good laugh out of that. I was looking at Salon this morning, and there was an article about, apparently Salon is for those of you who aren't familiar, I think it's San Francisco based, it's my favorite lunatic left-wing website. And they had an article about, apparently there's a documentary on the subject of pornography that is oriented toward a tickling fetish. So I guess they called this tickle porn. I'd never heard of it. So I read a few paragraphs of this piece in Salon, and about in the third paragraph, the guy says, and this movie is not about Donald Trump, which proves my theory that everything is about Donald Trump. Right? Because even if something's not about Donald Trump, you have to say it is about Donald Trump, or it's not about Donald Trump. And then later he made a very tenuous connection and said, actually, it is about Donald Trump, because some personality flaw of one of the people featured in this film reminds me of Trump. Anyway, which leads me to my answer to your question, which is I noticed last night on Twitter, after the referendum results were clear, there were a series of tweets, and then today there were a series of articles to the effect that this has nothing to do with Trump. This isn't good for Trump. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean anything. Ezra Klein of Vox, another one of my favorite, I call it the young adult website, he had a piece saying, this shows we need to stop trusting our guts and start trusting the polls. Subtext being, don't worry guys, Hillary's going to be okay. So all that leads me to think it's probably going to be good for Trump. and by the way, I would also note, the timing of Trump's trip to Scotland is interesting. A previous example of this is, did you notice how, I guess it was last month, when he started talking about the accusations of rape and other sexual misconduct against Bill Clinton, that coincided with Bill Cosby's arraignments. I happened to do an MSNBC hit that day, and it was perfect. I just demolished this poor girl from the Center for American Progress, John Podesta's group, who was making exactly the same defense of Bill Clinton that the Bill Cosby defense was making. This was a long time ago. He's an old man, and so on and so forth. But it leads me to think that Trump might have planned that trip. The timing of the trip was probably deliberate.
With malice aforethought, if you might. Right. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Or at least canniness of forethought.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
And I noticed also Hillary Clinton's people are already out saying that Trump's comments on Brexit prove that he's unfit to be president. Apparently he said, well, the pound is going down. That means the British are going to do more business. It means more people are going to come to Turnberry. That's his golf course in Scotland. And so they're saying, look, he's talking about how he stands to benefit from global turmoil. It seems a bit overwrought to me.
Yeah. Let's keep going with Trump a little bit. I mean, I'm
See, everything's about Trump.
I know. The question is, what have we learned from this so far? What still do we have learned? I mean, I'm among those who've been wrong from the beginning, thinking this is so implausible that he would win. I sort of went along with everyone else who said once it's a one-on-one contest, au fait, he's like Ross Perot all over again, and all of that turned out to be wrong. And what did we miss, or what should we be grabbing hold of here to say, how do you make sense of this?
Well, I think everyone was wrong at the beginning. The question is, how long were you wrong? But the one exception to that is Scott Adams, who draws Gilbert and is a resident of this part of the country, and has been very impressed with Trump's persuasion skills and has been blogging about it almost since the beginning of the campaign. I thought it was ridiculous at the beginning, and I found it, rather horrifying. And but I started taking it more seriously earlier than most, mainly because I had occasion to talk to Trump supporters. And the first thing that made me realize that there's actually something going on here that needs to be taken seriously was in August, I was asked to provide commentary for the first debate at the Women's National Republican Club in New York. And I didn't really have any commentary to give on a debate that hadn't taken place yet. So what I decided to do instead was I sort of made it into a discussion, almost like a focus group. So what I did was I asked for a show of hands who was for each candidate. And I was not expecting Trump to do particularly well. I kind of assumed that his support was from the rubes and the flyover state. I mean, I don't really think in those terms, but that's what I thought in a nicer way. But he was the most popular candidate among this probably fairly moderate, by Republican standards, urban New York, largely female crowd. And I would say about a third of the people raised their hands for Trump, and the rest of the people for various other candidates. Other things you might expect did turn out, like there was one person for Pataki, which you probably wouldn't get that anywhere else in the country. There were more people than you would get anywhere else for Christie, who's a local, but Trump was the most popular. So I said, well, those of you who are for Trump, what do you see in Trump? And a lady in the back of the room raised her hand, and I called on her. And she said, I'm for Trump because I believe in freedom of speech. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, he's not politically correct. And I didn't quite appreciate what she was saying. And then we watched the debate. And I wrote a column the next day about this. I quoted this lady, and I said, but Trump isn't just politically incorrect, he's also really rude. And but I've sort of come to think that may be a false distinction. That you can't really be politically incorrect on a sustained basis if you're concerned about being polite, because the two categories have blended so much, and the bullying left has such control over the culture that if you would all care about what other people think, you were going to censor yourself, and you're going to censor yourself in ways that are politically correct. Because the thought you have is, well, I have to pick my battles, right? And okay, this is something I might be willing to defend, but I don't know if it's worth risking a fight over. So I think in order to really take a stand against political correctness, you need somebody like Trump who just doesn't give a damn.
You mentioned something interesting, or suggested something interesting, that a lot of the exit polls show that Trump's strength for a very long time came more from moderate Republicans and independents than from very conservative Republicans, right? I think that's those.
I think that that was true in the earlier primaries. Yeah. I don't have enough recollection of the specifics of the exit polls to go into great detail, but what I recall from studying various exit polls is that often they were inconsistent with one another.
Yeah.
So in some places, Trump did better among older voters. In some places, he did better among younger voters. In some places, he did better among moderates and a few self-described liberals. In some places, he did better among conservatives. I think the latter, the support tended to become more conservative in the later states, but that may be because there was a culling of the field. It also depends. People in New York who describe themselves as conservatives may be different from people in South Carolina who describe themselves as conservatives. But it is true that Trump is not a standard conservative.
Precisely.
I mean, his ideological profile, well, Jamel Bowie of Slate, another one of my favorite left-wing websites, has done pieces in which he described Trump as he did one piece describing Trump as a moderate Republican, and another piece describing Trump as a fascist. So,
one from column A, one from column
right.
B. Well, at the back of that question, and I didn't mean to just divert us into the exit poll numbers that neither of us remember precisely, is this hypothesis. A lot of the so-called Reagan Democrats that Trump seems to be re-energizing probably weren't very Reaganite to begin with. I mean, when you think that Trump is drawing so much strength from his attacks on what has been a lot of Wall Street Journal orthodoxy, put it that way. Free trade, he's sounds almost indistinguishable from Bernie Sanders at times. He's all over the place on taxes. I think maybe he sorted out some on that, but I'm not sure about that. And then on entitlement reform, he's saying no to that. And immigration, that's the big one, right? He's taking so many unorthodox positions and succeeding very well with that. And that's where I'm wondering about an awful lot of voters out there, including ones who even have an R after their name, are not very ideological.
Yeah, or not ideological in the way that so-called movement conservatives were ideological. I mean, look, if you compare 1964 and 1980, the two times when a quote-unquote movement conservative were nominated for president, the results were vastly different. Now, maybe that means the country moved very far toward the conservative movement in 1980, or maybe it means that there was something more to Reagan's appeal that Goldwater lacked. And of course, we haven't really had somebody you could describe as a clear movement conservative as the Republican nominee since. I think Ted Cruz was going for that this year. But yeah, I think you're right. This does show that movement conservatism has limited appeal even within the Republican Party. And as somebody who's ideologically sympathetic with that, I find that somewhat dismaying. I've been fascinated to watch the reaction of the professional conservatives to the Trump phenomenon. I find the never Trump phenomenon very strange and vexing.
Yeah. Yeah, right. A lot of people are very worried right now. But they won't get any appointments or White House dinner invitations if Trump wins.
Well, they won't if Mrs. Clinton wins either, right? But I don't think that is sufficient to explain it. I mean, it's a combination of factors. It's part of it is. Part of it is what they say, which is a principled opposition to him on ideological grounds. But I think there's also a big element of it that's just purely a matter of taste.
Yeah.
I mean, they were able to make peace with Mitt Romney and John McCain, neither of whom is, I would argue, really any more ideologically conservative than Trump is when you add up all of their positions. They were, some of them, I think, just find Trump's personality repellent. I think, as a matter of taste, the question of character is a separate question, and that's a more serious one. Some of them find him a reprehensible character, although I don't see how one can favor Mrs. Clinton over him on character grounds. I mean, I don't know what could be more odious than to treat the White House as an asset in the marital estate of a crime family.
I'll ask you about, sorry.
And then I think part of it is the sense, a sense that if the Republican Party moves away from movement conservatism, the conservative movement sort of loses its direction or its.
Oh, perfect. That sets up my next question.
Sure.
I will come back to Hillary, but my next question before coming back to her, maybe we don't need to now, I don't know. But my next question is specifically about the parts of that the Wall Street Journal is so highly identified with. I mean, for the very long time, Wall Street Journal has been for free trade, pro-immigration, right? Defending finance capital, especially for demagogic attacks, of which Trump occasionally partakes in certain small ways, right? And then, of course, tax cuts and supply-side ideology. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to ask you separately about supply-side economics, I think. But on free trade, on immigration policy, stick with those two. Is it causing some, not second thoughts, not that you would change your mind, but are you thinking through, gosh, we've got to start over again and figuring out how to persuade people, given the way opinions have shifted, and there seems to be a collapse even among Republicans for trade liberalization.
Yeah, I mean, I think we understand that we are not necessarily winning this argument. I don't think we haven't reconsidered our positions. I mean, I don't know if we stand behind the Open Borders editorial that we wrote back in '84 or whatever. But we're still basically pro-immigration, pro-trade. So we disagree with Trump on what are his signature issues. And the page as a whole has never been enthusiastic for Trump. There's a range of opinion from Bret Stephens, who has said Hillary Clinton is the great conservative hope. So he's at the anti-Trump end, and James Freeman and I are at the anti-Trump end. I mean, probably most people here have seen my columns on the subject. Freeman wrote a column the other day having some fun at the expense of people who claim that Trump is an authoritarian. Right. In which one of the things he said was he talked about how past authoritarian and totalitarian dictators have, killed a lot of people when they were very young. He had the body count for Stalin when he was in his 60s, and he said, meanwhile Trump in his 60s sold cufflinks and cologne and so forth. And he said, did Stalin ever have his own fragrance? So I did a little research. Apparently there was an urban legend which Dear Abby checked out around 1980, I think, that Stalin had shown up at Yalta, and the other people at Yalta had been repelled by his body odor. So she asked Franklin Roosevelt's sons if that was true, and they said, well, we weren't at Yalta, but our sister, who had died by then, was at Yalta, and she probably would have mentioned something if it were true. So apparently it was an urban legend that Stalin had his own fragrance.
The other one that I mentioned to talk about separately is tax cuts and supply-side economics. I mean, the Wall Street Journal legendarily was the first major media organization, first major mouthpiece is not the right word. Back in the 70s under Bob Bartley, that really pushed the new idea of supply-side economics along. And to the point where it became an orthodoxy. I always sort of inclined to Milton Friedman's view that I'm for cutting any taxes at any time for any reason. However, it seems that circumstances have changed in a couple of ways. The tax cuts of Kemp-Roth gave a tax cut to just about everybody. It might have been small, but you got one. Now a lot of the tax cut programs, partly because previous tax cut rounds have taken so many people off the income tax rolls, are not actually offering something really. The politics of it aren't as attractive anymore. And so I wonder if that's another area where either you got to rethink the policy in some ways, and there have been these big arguments about the Rubio plan of having tax credits for children rather than lowering rates. And I'm wondering if you at the Journal or people you know have been rethinking supply-side economics for the 21st century.
Well, of course, part of the reason that it's become politically unpopular is because of what happened with the Bush tax cuts, where pretty much everyone did get a tax cut, except they were temporary. They were extended at the last minute in 2010 in full. And then when they came up in 2012, President Obama was determined not to allow them to be extended in full. So what happened was they were extended, I think, for people making under $400,000 or something less for single people. I forget exactly what it was. But basically, you had to be upper middle class or above to have your taxes increased. Everyone else got to keep the Bush tax cuts. So, it would be difficult to do an across-the-board tax cut without keeping the tax system fairly steeply progressive. We did like Trump's tax plan, which contradicts a number of the other things Trump has said. I mean, I think he actually at one point, and this was years ago before he began this presidential campaign, which you may recall is not his first. He briefly ran for the Reform Party nomination in 2000. Yeah. But he said somehow once long ago that he thought there should be a one-time wealth tax, which I don't think is constitutional. There's a provision in the Constitution which I don't quite understand about a direct tax. Yeah. And it has to be apportioned by state, and I don't really understand what that means.
It turns out the people who wrote it in 1787 didn't understand it.
Yeah,
I know a lot about that. It's a strange.
But I think it was originally understood to prohibit the income tax, which was why we needed the 16th Amendment. Right. So I don't think a federal wealth tax would fly in any case. But yeah, I mean Trump's instincts about this, who knows what they are. But at least he seems willing to. Nod in our direction on an issue that is not one of his core issues. By the way, he was very clever about this. He tweeted a couple of months ago something like, I propose this big tax cut. This is just an opening deal, so Congress may not lower taxes as much, but it's still a win. Right. So he's putting Congress in the position of being the tax raisers.
I'm going to open up to audience questions in a couple minutes, but so be thinking of a question when we come to you shortly. A couple more before I do that. One is if you have some more to say about Hillary, is she going to make it? I mean, what you mentioned the most salient aspect of her being part of essentially a crime family, but I'm astonished at her weakness that she couldn't beat anybody, even Donald Trump at his worst.
Well, I mean, she's a very bad candidate. As should have been clear in 2008. I remember, she has never, well, I guess she has not, she hasn't really. I mean, she hasn't won a campaign in which she had a really serious opponent. Rick Lazio in 2000, when she ran for Senate, and she still finished 5 points behind Al Gore in New York. She essentially ran unopposed in 2006 in a heavily Democratic year. She was inevitable in 2008, and she didn't win. She was inevitable this year, and a 74-year-old socialist from Vermont, who had never been a Democrat in his life, won 22 states and gave her a good run for her money. So, there's a theory that anybody but Trump would beat her easily. And I think Paul Gigot has said on our TV show, it may be that Trump is the only one who can beat, it may be that Trump is the only one who could lose to Hillary, and Hillary is the only one who could lose to Trump. Now this depends what you think of Trump. I mean, Scott Adams still thinks that Trump is going to win by a landslide. It's hard but not impossible to imagine that.
Well,
but if he does, we may be having a very different conversation a year from now.
Your mention of Sanders queued up my last question before I told the audience, which is, beyond Sanders, I'm sure you've seen the numbers, especially the millennials, who our new leaders group is mainly directed at, of the comeback of socialism. A number of people who say they like it, a number of political leaders who will say openly that they're for it, beyond even just Sanders. Is this a surprise, and what are you folks at the Journal saying or thinking about this?
Well, I suppose it's a surprise in the way that most new things are surprises, or old things that come back that you thought were dead. But I think Peggy Noonan had, whose column I edit every week, had the best take on this, which is she pointed out that if you are under 30, you have no memory of communism of the Soviet Union. Socialism doesn't have the same connotation to somebody that age as it does to somebody your age or my age. They're starting with something of a blank slate, and then they're going to schools where they're being taught by left-wing ideologues. And in addition, their views of capitalism are colored by what happened in 2008. Right. But it is fascinating that age divide in the Democratic primaries, which we also saw in 2008. But this time it was kind of weird because Obama was, young and cool and whatnot. Sanders, I mean, I guess he's cool in a kind of ironic way. Charles Blow of the New York Times had the one witty line I can ever remember him writing, which was, he described, that's not an exaggeration, he described Mrs. Clinton, he described Sanders and Mrs. Clinton as the cool uncle versus the cold aunt. And yeah, I mean, there's something likable about Sanders, even for those of us who abhor everything he stands for, and also recognize that he's not that bright.
Yeah, I remember, it was about 10 years ago now, because that's about how long Milton Friedman's been gone from us, but talking to him here in town about one of the spikes in gasoline prices, and the usual water boxer saying these evil oil companies are behind it, and somebody said to him, there's been no enthusiasm for bringing back price controls. And Milton said, just wait, that's because there are enough people alive today who remember the 70s and the energy crises. When that generation is gone, you're going to see it all come back. And, he was right about many things, right about that, too.
Well, Sanders was old, I'm sure of that. By the way, I should justify my statement that he's not very bright, because that's a mean thing to say. It's just, without justifying it, probably meaner if I do, but what the hell. So I follow Sanders on Twitter, his Senate account, which used to follow me but stopped. He's always, he or his staffers are always tweeting these pronouncements, and one of the common themes is, it makes no sense that a student should pay a higher interest rate on his student loans than you pay on your mortgage. And invariably, when he tweets something like this, people will chime in and explain the idea of collateral. And it never sinks in. That's what I mean when I say he's not very bright.
Right. Let's open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. Yes. Catherine, I forget.
Regarding the pending possible indictment against Hillary for her myriad crimes and misdemeanors, where do you see that going? And depending on which way it goes, what do you see the fallout being?
Well, it's hard to believe that she will actually be indicted. A friend of mine says the only reason to indict her is because she's committed crimes. And so I suspect that what will happen is they will make the decision, Loretta Lynch will make the decision not to indict her. And what Lynch will tell herself, I don't think she needs to, I don't think there's any expectation that she'll explain this publicly. But what she'll tell herself is it would be too disruptive institutionally to bring a criminal case against a former Secretary of State. So it's a kind of a high-minded political reason not to indict. I think that will be the explanation that we'll hear from commentators and politicians on the liberal side. I find it fascinating, by the way, that it is almost universally assumed that she won't be indicted, and you never hear liberals, defenders of the administration, express outrage at this assumption that the justice system is the Justice Department is politicized. I think that's very telling, the absence of any outrage about that. So the question, assuming that that's correct and that she's not indicted, and assuming that there is evidence that would support an indictment, which one kind of assumes there is, the question is, what will leak about what they find, and what will Jim Comey do about it? And I don't know the answer to that, but those are the things to watch.
Someone else? Yeah.
So, a lot of my friends are Sanders supporters, and I've never really understood.
I thought you looked young.
That's too bad. And I never really understood the idea that wealth inequality is a moral wrong. But as far as the last source I checked, there's a record number of American families with net worths over 50 million. And I'm just wondering, is there a conservative way to fight wealth inequality? I mean, is there a conservative way? Because based on the data that my liberal friends show me, it seems that it's there. And though I've never really understood a moral wrong with it, practically it doesn't seem that convenient to the economy.
Well, I think not only is it not morally wrong, but it is, I think wealth inequality is probably a good thing because as there's more wealth, there tends to be more inequality, even if there is more wealth at the bottom of the distribution. So I don't know that fighting wealth inequality is wealth or income inequality. Usually it's framed as income inequality because I think that's where they have the best statistics. I don't know that it's something that's worth doing. I think it's better to make the argument that it's not morally wrong. Mickey Kaus wrote a book about 30 years ago called The End of Equality. And he argued, and I think there's really something to this, what's really important is not the inequality of income or wealth, but social inequality. That's what you see, I think, to a large extent with the Trump movement, perhaps to a lesser extent with the Sanders movement. People are just sick and tired of elites and people who think that they're better than they are. And I have a lot of sympathy for that, even though I suppose in my role as a journalist for the biggest paper in the country, I'm part of the elite. But I think that that's probably a bigger problem than wealth inequality per se.
Yeah, that's a big subject. Yes.
Back when I was as young as the millennials, I remember my ROTC building at University of California sit-in taking place. I remember my classroom sit-ins preventing me from going to class because the cause of stopping the war was greater than social cohesion or social rules. I was shocked to see now that my generation is in Congress that now even the rules of Congress can be flouted and stopped by sit-ins with a sort of moral preening. Would you comment, not necessarily on gun control, but just on the idea of congressmen destroying Congress?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this and say, where are the headlines saying House Democrats attempt to shut down the government?
Well, they weren't shutting down the government; they were just shutting down the House of Representatives, which probably has more sympathy from people across the country. All right, a few comments on the sit-in. First of all, I got back. I was at a dinner party last night. I got back to the hotel here where I'm staying, and one of the first things I tweeted was in all caps, "Hot damn, that sit-in was historic." I mean, you didn't even ask about it because it's been overtaken by events in the past 2 days, by actually historic events in the past 2 days. Did you know that the Republican minority staged a sit-in over an energy bill in, I believe it was 2008, when the Democrats controlled the House? And what happened was, Nancy Pelosi's Democrats, I guess we're in her district now, not only shut down the C-SPAN cameras, but also turned out the lights. So hardly anyone noticed that this was going on. So the Democrats do it, and they leave the lights on, and one of the congressmen has his phone, and he starts broadcasting this on something called Periscope, which I guess is a live video social media platform. There's so many social media platforms, I can't keep up with them. I'm basically a Twitter guy, and I still post up on Facebook, although they changed it too much, so I pretty much stopped using it 6 years or so ago. And then C-SPAN started broadcasting that. And I don't know, I think my reaction to it was, these people look like lunatics. And I don't think this helps the Democrats. I guess it's disturbing that they did it. The other side has done it also. But at least they're being exposed for what they're doing. One further comment. The guy who was the ringleader of this, Representative John Lewis of Georgia, is an actual hero. of the civil rights movement. In 1965 at Selma, he had his head beaten in. And it was fascinating to watch the reaction, from left-wingers on Twitter and in the news media. Ezra Klein, the Vox editor, the young adult website, tweeted, "It's really powerful to watch John Lewis." My thought on this is, one of the hazards of being a hero is that you're so surrounded by admirers that either nobody knows or nobody dares tell you when you're being ridiculous. And I feel a little bad for John Lewis for that reason.
I thought Speaker Ryan should have sent down juice boxes to all of them.
Well, a couple of senators sent them craisins, which I learned are dried cranberries.
One more question there in the back.
One question. This relates to your column last Monday, too, about the terrorist who wasn't Islamic and so forth.
Story. I mean, you didn't even ask about it because it's been overtaken by events in the past 2 days, by actually historic events in the past 2 days. Did you know that the Republican minority staged a sit-in over an energy bill in, I believe it was 2008, when the Democrats controlled the House? And what happened was, Nancy Pelosi's Democrats, I guess we're in her district now, not only shut down the C-SPAN cameras, but also turned out the lights. So hardly anyone noticed that this was going on. So the Democrats do it, and they leave the lights on, and one of the congressmen has his phone, and he starts broadcasting this on something called Periscope, which I guess is a live video social media platform. There's so many social media platforms, I can't keep up with them. I'm basically a Twitter guy, and I still post stuff on Facebook, although they changed it too much, so I pretty much stopped using it 6 years or so ago. And then C-SPAN started broadcasting that. And I don't know, I think my reaction to it was, these people look like lunatics. And I don't think this helps the Democrats. I guess it's disturbing that they did it. The other side has done it also. But at least they're being exposed for what they're doing. One further comment. The guy who was the ringleader of this, Representative John Lewis of Georgia, is an actual hero of the civil rights movement. In 1965 at Selma, he had his head beaten in. And it was fascinating to watch the reaction, from left-wingers on Twitter and in the news media. Ezra Klein, the Vox editor, the young adult website, tweeted, "It's really powerful to watch John Lewis." My thought on this is, one of the hazards of being a hero is that you're so surrounded by admirers that either nobody knows or nobody dares tell you when you're being ridiculous. And I feel a little bad for John Lewis for that reason.
I thought Speaker Ryan should have sent down juice boxes to all of them.
Well, a couple of senators sent them craisins, which I learned are dried cranberries.
One more question there in the back.
One question.